Hi, everybody. Welcome to Forum 1's April 2013 webinar, Connect Audiences with Your Cause, How Can Branding Benefit the Benevolent? I'm Michael Rader of Forum 1 Communications, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. To prevent any background noise, we've got everyone's phone lines currently muted. We've got a lot of enthusiasm for this topic. In fact, this is our second time presenting. And so in order that we have time for as many questions as possible, please submit your questions via the chat feature during the presentation. And we'll have about 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end, and we'll respond to questions that have been submitted via the chat. We will also email you a link to the archived webinar within a few days. Today's presentation is going to be led by Laura Caselas and myself, Michael Rader. Laura is the manager of online marketing and advocacy for Forum 1, where she creates strategic online marketing plans for clients looking to achieve organizational goals through refining their brand, messaging, and audience engagement on online channels. And I'm Michael Rader. I was the project officer on this project, and I'll be sort of filling in for Janelle Eli, who is from USCRI, and unfortunately will not be able to join us today. So now I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to Laura. Laura, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. Hello, everybody. This is Laura from Forum 1. Thanks for joining. So how can branding really benefit the benevolent? So today what we're going to do is we're going to explore what branding is, how the public sector organizations, young and old, can use branding to better connect with their audiences, and why the strong brand that you build for yourself will help you achieve results on the social web. So we're also going to be featuring a case study, as Michael was mentioning, for U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. It's a 100-year-old NGO that really wanted to experiment with the social web and social media, and so we use branding to help propel them forward. All right, so what is a brand? As consumers, we're exposed to brands every day, but mission-driven brands exist too. Your brand is really the emotional connection that your organization has with your audiences. So whether you're intentionally shaping your brand or not, your organization's brand is sending emotional signals. So why don't you want to already start to control the signal? So on the line, you might be asking yourself, but I thought my logo was my brand. It is. It's certainly a piece of your brand and your brand identity, but actually, the solid brand requires first knowing who you really are and what you stand for, the true fabric of who you are as an org. It's your mission, your vision, your personality, and your position in the ecosystem. And so this diagram is meant to illustrate that by saying who you are is the foundation of your brand, and you first have to understand that first. Then as you're building on that, you start building core messages and then targeted messages, the look and feel that reflects your personality. This is the color scheme and your visual identity. And then the logo on the top, that really caps it all off. But together, this diagram represents your entire brand. Okay, so let's pause for a quick water break. And I really wanted to walk everybody through a really impactful illustration of branding. I'll credit a college professor of mine who really turned me on to branding and the power of branding applied to a commodity product, which is water. So let's take a look. How does this picture make you feel? Thirsty, maybe bored, maybe indifferent? Well, it makes sense because this product is obviously water. But if you're thirsty, go ahead and choose which one you want. Pretty easy, right? They're all the same. So there was no anxiety around the decision. So let's go ahead and pivot. Now, what about now? How do you feel now? Obviously, now we're starting to develop some opinions. You're drawn to one product over the other. You're still just thirsty. You still just want water, but you're feeling differently. Why? And it's really because through a mix of packaging design and color and messaging, these brands are conveying emotional response, and they want consumers to have a specific emotional connection to this brand. So each of these products has a personality, whether you know it or not. Water has a personality. Well, that doesn't make much sense. The commodity product itself doesn't have a personality. But through that packaging design and the color and the visual display, it's created a personality. So then you start wondering, okay, Laura, well, we're in the public sector. We don't sell products and we don't design packaging. But you really do. Your content of your organization, the messages that you're sending out, your mission, that is your product. And it really has to be styled and crafted to reflect who you are. So we want to think about this case study from USCRI and how we work together to create and uncover a powerful brand. USCRI, as we mentioned, was a 100-year-old organization, and they really wanted to experiment with social web. This is an example, a screenshot from their website on what their website currently looks like today, and what it looked like when we were working with them as well. And as you can see, kind of the personality that it's conveying is kind of negative. It's showing the refugees as they're in their journey to safety. And what we really wanted to do is to show the strong, valuable work that the client was doing in the U.S., which is basically to resettle these refugees in our country and to get them to self-sufficiency in our country so that they can become prosperous citizens. So let's take a look at some of their goals. And these might look really familiar to folks on the phone when you're talking about your communications efforts or specifically social media efforts. You might want to be wanting to raise your organizational profile or gain media exposure. You want to be able to tell stories. That's really big nowadays. People want to do visual storytelling. How do you tell those stories effectively on the social web? To establish thought leadership in your particular sector. And then for some of you on the line, it might be to encourage online fundraising. So developing a strong brand will actually help you address each one of these. Okay, so we heard the challenge. The organization wanted to explore social media through a pilot program to kind of prove the concept of social media. And so we wanted to show a model today to explain to you how we approach social media and why branding is integral to it. So this Venn diagram represents that in order to be successful on social media or on the social web, you first have to understand your brand. And again, it goes to your essence, the expression of who you are, the emotion you're trying to evoke, the experiences that you want your audiences to have with your content and with your brand. And then direct marketing. And direct marketing is the ask. What are you asking them to do? You're asking them to engage. You're asking them to take an action, maybe sign up for a newsletter, maybe attend a webinar, join an offline event, something like that. And the intersection of those two is really what can get really fun with social media. It's the creative piece of it. It's the experimental piece. So how can you unlock the fabric of your benevolent brand? We hear this all the time. I used to work at the State Department. They said all the time, you're trying to win the hearts and minds of audiences. So how do we actually do that? Well, what it means is we've got to first understand what makes them tick. Really, what drives them at that DNA level, and how can you connect with them so that they feel they want to be a part of your organization? So here's the process that we use, and it's something that you all can walk away with today as well and use this process in your office and across your organization. We take a 4-step process. So we start with shaping the story. What is that big story that we want to tell? Where are we going? What's the direction of the brand of the organization? What do we stand for? And then defining the platforms. Where are we going to serve this content and this message? Is it going to be website? Is it going to be social? Is it going to be email, mobile? What are we trying to do? What are those platforms? And then to create the content is to actually, now this is when we're putting the pen to the paper, to start designing the content. What is it going to look like? What type of content? Is it text-based content, visual? Is it video, multimedia? And then finally to measure the results, to make sure we know from this effort how successful was it. So again, let's move and start talking about how to start shaping that story. It's really defining the brand. It's that image, the personality, and the positioning. So for USCRI, we kicked off with meeting with their leadership and some of their field offices as well to really understand their organization and their programs, some of their comparators and what they're doing in the space, and then their audience needs as well. And a lot of people hear that, understanding the audience. You really have to take a holistic view of what's going on around the organization. So think about these elements as it relates to your organization and kind of begin piecing them together, understanding your particular objectives, big picture, and then your brand image, understanding layering that in with your audience needs and the comparators to take a look, what are they doing? And all of this together really forms that solid brand platform. So for USCRI, as an example, we walked them through an exercise to understand. We said to them, tell us 3 adjectives that would describe your organization. And this is kind of what came back. You know, from the CEO in particular, she said old and red. We really want to dive into that and understand, what does that mean, old and red? And started looking at their color palette and kind of the overall image that they were projecting. Tenacious, human-focused, impartial, service-oriented, veracity. Since words started to emerge, and this starts to shape the personality. Then you want to start thinking about your core messages. So you want to be able to convey these core messages to audiences. What's important? What's most relevant? What are the big ideas? And so again, an exercise that we walk the USCRI through that you all would be able to do internally as well is to understand what core messages are you trying to relay to your target audiences. So what we did is we threw this into a word cloud, and what we started seeing is, oh wow, look at these really positive words that are starting to emerge. Human, need, provides, needs, difference. And so if you remember back to the screenshot of the homepage, that was more of a negative undertone, whereas the messaging that they wanted to relay was very positive. So there was a disconnect there. The next step that we took is actually to walk through a positioning matrix to understand what position do you hold in the marketplace. Again, private sector does this all the time, and the public sector absolutely can benefit from this. So this is meant to accurately kind of pinpoint where you are on a two-dimensional matrix. And so the matrix that we use for USCRI is to say international and domestic, where are they conducting their work? Are they working within the U.S. or are they working internationally within the refugee camps? And then the other dimension is home versus harm. And harm would be in, the country of conflict, for example, or in the refugee camp, which USCRI considered, again, to be a danger zone because it's not a permanent home. It's just a temporary housing. And then home being where are they actually being resettled? And that's here in our country with USCRI's efforts. And so we actually found that they were mispositioning themselves, where they were kind of positioning themselves in the lower left quadrant. And we were trying to shift them to be more central, moving toward domestic, to really showcase the good work that they do here in our country. Again, looking at comparators is invaluable, especially on the social web, to see what they're doing. We wanted to look from a brand perspective. And so once you understand that mission and the personality, you want to look at those comparators. So here's an example, UNHCR. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is the UN Refugee Agency. So it's clear from their logo and from the photo in this particular image that they are working in the refugee camps. The same was true for IRC, another comparator. Again, their logo, and here's someone working in the refugee camp with a T-shirt on with their logo, so the brand is really prevalent there in that international arena. And then we look at USCRI. And so, again, just a simple exercise of laying all your materials on the table and taking a look to see what message you're conveying. Look at your collateral, look at screenshots of your website and your social presences. And so here are the visuals. Again, they're focusing on the people, but it's not clear if the people are in the camps or if they're in the U.S. And in one of the images, you can insinuate that they are in the camp and they're fleeing something. They're not really resettling and becoming the prosperous citizens that USCRI wants them to become. So from all of that research, what we do is we put together a conceptual map. And this isn't meant to be a polished design. It's just meant to tell a story. So you can even just take simple screenshots and pull images and shuffle them around to tell what your story is. So for USCRI, their story was kind of threefold. On the left here, we see some images. We see the refugees in the camps. We see the actual refugee camps. And then also immigrants, too. These are unaccompanied immigrant children. We see them riding on top of trains to come into our country for a better life. This black diagonal line represents the U.S. international border. And what you see on the right is all of the actual activities that USCRI has. They have mentoring opportunities. They have ESL language opportunities, job placement opportunities. These are all their programs. And so what we wanted to tell is the story that, yes, the refugee and immigrant issues are alive and well, and we've got to address those. Those are the issues. However, we know that once they get placed into the service of USCRI, these refugees and immigrants are coming here for a better life. They're coming for the American dream. They're wanting to resettle and have a sense of family and friendship and community. They come with a strong work ethic. They're coming for bright horizons, a better tomorrow. And that's what these images represent. And then finally, as you're moving along that continuum, the migrants are actually becoming self-actualized. They're becoming citizens. They're becoming successful Americans, successful humans. And so the underlying foundation of all of that, again, is the human story or the American story. This is the pursuit of every human. Every human wants to be safe. It's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
And I think one thing that's important to note about this is, although this wasn't really what we consider sort of a final deliverable in that it's a product that we USCRI was going to display, this became a key piece of how we put this campaign together in that it represented sort of the shared vision that we agreed on with USCRI on sort of what's the story that we're trying to tell throughout this project. And this conceptual map constantly became something that we referred back to and said, what we're doing now on the tactical level, does that fit into this story? And vice versa, are there pieces of this story that we're not telling or that need further sort of clarification? And so this became really a key document or key image that we used throughout the whole course of the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in its absence, you might have a text-based plan. And that's really not as powerful as something that's visual. You might still want to have your text-based plan where you're going with your marketing strategy and your communication strategy, but having something that's visual like this is, again, like Michael said, you could always go back to it and reference it. It gets you to the big picture. Okay, so then we wanted to move on and say, okay, so what is this campaign concept? We knew that they didn't want to go across all social channels. We were going to focus on one particular platform, and we needed to be able to tell that story effectively on the platform. So we needed to develop a campaign concept. So how do we boil all this research down into one succinct message, almost like a tagline or a brand promise, what the organization stands for? The one thing that people should know about your org. If they don't know anything else, what's the one thing they should know? And we came up with this, here for good. The promise takes on so many different meanings. And what does it stand for? It could stand for USCRI has been doing this since 1911, so they're certainly here for good as an organization doing good things. They have an extensive network of volunteers, pro bono attorneys who are here for good. And then some language that we put together that really encapsulates all this is this. For 237 years, our country has been touched by and enriched by newcomers. So they come here, meaning the migrants, the refugees and the immigrants. They're coming here with good intentions. They add so much to our society. And then neighbors welcome them and support them in their new home. So that tells that whole story of migration and the support of people coming into our country, new Americans. So then what we did, and these are kind of like the measures that you should use to ensure that this is the right fit for your organization. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to really convey the brand essence. It's also got to be flexible so that it can work across all the programs of your organization. It shouldn't just be one particular program area can benefit from it. It should be able to work for the entire brand. And so in that sense, it functions as a framework where it can contain many messages that, that's when you're getting into the targeted messages. So this is the core message, and you can get into the targeted messages as it relates to your programs. But it really overall needs to function as a framework. We also really loved it in USCRI as well in that it was timeless. It could be for 2013 and beyond. It doesn't feel as if it could be dated. And then it's adaptable for online, offline, and across social. So even though we knew we were going with Facebook, it could easily be a hashtag, here for good. So it could work on Twitter and Instagram and other platforms that require hashtag use. And then the two most important pieces of it to be successful on social is that it's got to be emotional and it's got to be motivating. And we saw that when we talked about the hearts and minds. So here it was really clear and powerful, and there was already a built-in call to action. You could almost start asking your audience, are they here for good, to get them to be in support of the cause. And what we really liked about this, and we say this all the time, is it was positively contagious. And for those of you that might be on the line that work in the international development sector, you'll maybe hear this phrase being thrown around where people are kind of, it's like the fatigue of the negativity. Catastrophe fatigue. And so how do you spin it so it's positive? And that's what we wanted to do here. We know that there's a lot of refugee and immigrant issues going on. However, we know that since 1911, USCRI has been making a big impact on placing these refugees and immigrants in our country with some astounding results.
And that's the key part too, is that this message and this framework can continue on and you can use it whether you're in the middle of a big policy battle or whether there's something going on with your issue right now. It's something that's constantly sort of there in the background and that you can always creating materials that they can then draw from when they need to make a case for, say, comprehensive immigration reform. You can say, well, look at all the positive stories we have about the contributions of migrants and immigrants to our society. And then it becomes a repository that always is ready to tell the message in whatever framework you really need in the moment.
Yep. And that's what makes social media so wonderful, is that basically you're keeping a pulse on the nation, your audience, your community, keeping a pulse on them to say that they're here for good too and they support your work. Okay, so now we've got the big picture. We've got the kind of tagline, campaign tagline. We needed to move to the brand image, and we alluded to that a bit when we were showing you some of the screenshots. What you need to do is you need to ensure that your current perception of your brand matches with the narrative. And so we knew from that positioning matrix that it wasn't the case. USCRI, through their visual and through their messaging, they were positioning themselves in a different way versus the optimal way. And so we're going to show you how we went and changed that. Again, this is an illustration of some of the materials that they had. Spread your materials on the table and take a look and see what colors. There's a psychology to every color. What is it telling you? What story is it telling you? And so from a collateral and marketing materials audit, we found this one-dimensional color palette and images with a pretty negative vibe. So look at the little girl in the top left, for example. She looks like she's behind a screen of red with maybe fenced in. She doesn't look safe. She doesn't really look happy. So she's in trouble. She's in danger. It's a bit hopeless. And then look at the little boy with the messaging. Again, pretty hopeless messages. So why would someone want to donate to this cause if they didn't think it would help? Is the idea behind why we needed to pivot and shift their brand image. So again, think about the color palette. Here with USCRI, it was red, black, and white. What does your color palette look like? And the CEO, remember from USCRI, when we asked them adjectives to describe the organization, they said red and old. And so apparently they've been using this color scheme since she can remember. And it was just one adjective that described USCRI. And we have to keep in mind from a branding perspective that colors have psychology. So think back to those water bottle examples again. Colors can affect the mood and the emotion. So as it's applied here, it reads really negative. Red usually stands for anger or danger, blood, aggression. And then overall, the tones were really harsh. It was just sharp black or white. Nothing was really softened. But through our materials audit, we stumbled on this. And this was their annual report from 2011. So again, that's why we encourage you, spread your materials out, see what pops out, what's different, what might be that moment of insight for you. For us, it was this. And it really caught our attention because it was so different. This is actually the same little girl that I asked you to look at in the earlier screen. But what's different here is that she's more human. She's more hopeful. She's kind of cracking a smile. I want to reach out and help her. She's got this beautiful headdress on. She looks alive. So vibrant. So we thought, okay, what if we kept red as the primary? Because you don't want to totally revamp your brand. That takes a bit of effort. But what if we kept the primary color as red, start to soften the black to charcoal, and then start adding colors that have those emotions, those positive emotions, like yellow, sunshine, blue, vitality, green, new birth, new beginnings, spring. Orange could be ethnicity and spice. So USCRI's leadership initially was a bit reluctant because they weren't sure what that meant, really changed their brand. But then once we started putting together some samples for them, they were really excited because they said, wow, you're really turning it into being a modern and playful look. And they knew that that would win on social. We also added in some typography options as well. Typography is huge with your brand as well. And they went with a hand-stamped one. They went with the second one there in the middle. And we really like that because we said it's like made in America. You know, Betsy Ross, hand sewn, hand stitched. This is the American story we're trying to tell. So then we move on to defining the platforms. Again, you take a look at your platform, see what's going on there, see what's happening. You've got web, you've got email, you have social. You probably have several social channels. For USCRI, they have a headquarters in DC, and then they have 6 field offices. So each one of these red dots represents their field offices. You may have the same setup. I mean, we have partner agencies and things like that. And then the blue dots represent Facebook. And what we found from our audit was that Facebook was the one that was most popular within USCRI. The staff felt most comfortable with it and its functionality. And it also had the greatest following. And then the gray dots represent any other social platforms. And so for this particular campaign, we said because your organization feels most comfortable on Facebook, and we know that we're trying to use this as a proof of concept, let's stick where you're most comfortable and where you have the largest following. So what we wanted to do is optimize their news feed. Facebook has a news feed. We didn't want to grow their community per se. We wanted to rather make sure that their community that they already have sees their content and engages with their content. And also, since we weren't adapting the website for this pilot campaign, we actually added some web functionality into Facebook. So this is what Facebook kind of looks like out of the box. This is what their Facebook presence looked like. And what we did is we worked with our developers here to introduce some apps. There were 2 apps that we introduced. One was email newsletter sign up, and the other one was donations. So kind of, a lot of people ask that question about Facebook. They say, gosh, Facebook is almost turning into a website. In a way. And so we just wanted to make sure that since we were going to have the conversation solely on Facebook, we wanted all that functionality at our fingertips. All right, so now we needed to create the content. So this is when the abstract, the shaping of the story, becomes tangible as we started to plan out the content. So this is a screenshot of what USCRI's content looked like before we got involved. And so this is perhaps what some of your content looks like as well. If you look on your Facebook page, it's kind of text heavy. It might have an image at the bottom. And so it's not really getting a lot of shares and engagement. And it's not really visually stimulating either. So what we do is we walk through a content planning matrix. This is another tool that you can use. And what it does, if you remember back from the conceptual story about the organization, there were 3 pieces. There were the issues, the program success, and the migrant stories. So start with a few topics that you know are the biggest picture for you, and then chart it out on the other dimension with types, different ways that you can convey that story. So educational might be one, inspirational, engaging. And let's just look at one intersection. We don't have the whole thing populated here, but it just gives you an idea. So at the intersection of USCRI program success and inspirational, you found an amazing statistic, which is, I don't know the actual percentage right now, but they had something where it's almost like 80% are self-sufficient within 180 days. And to like pull in some volunteer quotations. Same thing with migrant stories and inspirational. We knew that if we were to tell the American story and the human story, we needed to have that audience also think back to their own stories and their mentor stories and the cultural impact that migrants have had on our society.
And as you'll see later in the presentation, this proved to be one of the most engaging ways in which we sort of found a way to tell this story. Is by connecting the migrant stories and the stories of people that are migrating and immigrating here now to people's own personal histories. And you'll see better examples of that in a few minutes.
And that's where social's huge again, and because otherwise it becomes a broadcast mechanism. If all you're doing is sending out press releases and we did this, it's not going to be as engaging as if you should be interested because this relates to you. And that's what we really did with this campaign. And that's what branding is all about. It's that emotional connection. A little bit of theory again, and you'll see through this whole presentation, I really hope that what you all walk away with is some theory and some practical knowledge. This is a great diagram that represents what's happening in the media sphere in general. In 2010, people were creating content 100%. Now we're in 2013 and they're realizing that's just not a sustainable model, because on Twitter and Facebook you've got to be posting multiple times a day. People are expecting for you to be in the news and in their feed. So in 2013, we're almost at a 50-50 split where there's this notion of curation. And it's much like a museum curator. You're taking your materials, you're looking at your comparators' materials and your partners' materials, and you're curating it into your own custom collection. And in 2015 and beyond, it's going to be much more prevalent where we're seeing more curated material. Another good example of curation could even be if you have some videos. If you have videos that stand alone, how can you then create them into a montage so it becomes another video? Or how can you take one larger long-form video, 4 minutes plus, and create it into smaller segments? And that's curation. It's using what you've already got. And that's what we did with USCRI. We actually gave Janelle some homework. We said, okay, so we use this content matrix. We know what we want to talk about. Can you go out and get this material? And she said, absolutely. And afterwards, what she said is, it was so amazing how the material, she said, her brand was staring her in the face. It maybe was on her desk, maybe in her filing cabinet. All of this material was available. It just wasn't, quote unquote, curated or organized in a way to tell the story. So we had her, go through and get donor stories, and that was their personal migration stories. We had her get some inspirational quotes. And so we had her do some homework and put that into some folders for us so that we can start creating the content.
And I think that sort of exercise is really valuable in this situation because, again, you may not have the time or resources to go through a whole long strategic process like we're demonstrating here, but even taking a look at what you have and what's available and then sort of stepping back, looking at the gestalt and saying, what's the story here? What are we trying to say? Even like taking some time to develop that perspective for yourself can be extremely valuable in going forward, because then you're saying, is what I'm doing now contributing to that story? Is what I'm doing right now telling part of that story, or am I off in some other direction? And it can really help you focus and sort of narrow and target your efforts on social media and on digital communications in general.
Yep. So what we did next, once we took their material, is we started kind of wireframing it out. And so for those of you who have been through a redevelopment process of your website, you've seen wireframes before. You don't necessarily have to do them for social, but we did it to make sure, because again, we wanted the senior staff to be on board. We wanted the entire organization to move with us in this cultural shift to adopt the social web. So what we did is we mapped out a cover photo for Facebook, and then the individual posts, timeline posts. And so this campaign spanned 5 weeks, and so each week had a different theme. And so this theme was, for example, USCRI programs, what they do and where they work. And we found from research that there were so many misconceptions about the organization. And this goes back to that positioning matrix. Many people thought they were either A, U.S. government agency, or B, they thought they were internationally focused. So because we needed to make that positioning shift, we need to actually confront that. And so what we did is we put together a map that showed all of the impact that they have domestically. So this is the cover photo and then the particular timeline photo for 5 weeks. So it ended up being 1 cover photo plus 4 timeline photos for the 5-day week. So that's the timeline. That's a black and white sketch of it. And now we're going to reveal the full color to show you how everything now comes together. We shaped the story. We defined the platforms. We created the content. We looked at the color scheme and the brand expression, and we came up with this. So this is that map. And this is a heat map that kind of shows the impact that they have. But look already the colors and how vivid they are. You have the timeline photo there. You have the Here for Good tagline that's kind of superimposed on a parchment paper, again, showing that American story from the beginning. We've been doing this. We've had refugees and immigrants coming to our country. And then we optimized each one of their timeline posts as well. So these were stories, again, that Janelle and the folks at USCRI had in front of them. And here are some things, for example, we learned to say hello in 95 different languages last year. That's so powerful to put on social. And then we coupled it with a message that asked the community, how many languages can you even name? So we just thought that was so astounding. We couldn't even think of 95 languages. Another one that was really strong was we have rescued victims of human trafficking in 52 cities. And I think we coupled that with a message that said, hey, human trafficking can happen in your backyard. You know, we kind of just heard about that up in Ohio. Yeah. So these are the kinds of images. I'm going to walk through each theme. This was theme 1, basically, which was USCRI programs and success. This was another theme that we used, which was kind of American ideals or human ideals. And we went with a lot of the images that they had. These are their own images. This isn't stock photography. Took their images and said courage, freedom, hope, family. This is really what Americans stand for. This is what people stand for. Everyone deserves to have this. The next theme was humanitarian quotes, and so we took influential people from history and said, look at different times, different lands, same sentiment, here for good. And we're showing, again, this good stories they were telling. A fun anecdote out of this one is Gandhi's quote. It was the first day of spring, and we said, oh, this has got to be the one that we push out there. And this one, I think, went the most viral. This one got the most engagement as well. It says, I do not wish my house to be walled on all sides and my windows stuffed. I want all cultures in all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. And so on the first day of spring, again, that's where you have to be cognizant of what's going around in the social media as well. It's just, okay, here's a particular moment in time, and this is an opportunity. And the text that accompanied this said, you know, today's the first day of spring, celebrate, open your windows, open your doors, open your minds. Another theme was that drawing these parallels between today's migration waves and those of yesterday. And so how did your family come to America? Actually asking them that. And so each one of these everyday posts or the timeline posts came from their donors. So they pulled this out of their donor stories. A couple in here are really powerful. What's really good about this is it shows from 1630, you know, even the Mayflower goes that far back, all the way to modern times with Holocaust. And it shows you the diversity in the people, where they're coming from, but everybody came here for good. Everyone was coming here for a better life. And then the final one, and this was, I think, week 5, turned out to be the most popular one, was saying, we know there are a lot of myths and stereotypes around refugees and immigrants, but let's go ahead and debunk them. Let's confront them. And the visual here tells that story. It says, when you have a stereotype about someone, you don't know them, and so they're kind of shrouded in mystery. So we want to give you the full color picture, the actual fact. We want to show you the myths, but then we want to tell you the facts. And so these went over very well. And again, it just shows you again that this, even though this was just a 5-week campaign, this is very sustainable for them in the long term, where I'm sure they can come up with, and I think they already had, several dozen myths and fact combinations that they can continue on the social web. This illustrates, again, we talked about those APIs or those apps that we built for Facebook. So we connected into their donation system and we connected into their e-newsletter as well. You see that in the bottom right. So that was all the original content that we created to keep them going for the 5 weeks. But what about curation? We talked about that earlier. How do we keep it going so it's not just a 5-week moment in time campaign? We want to keep that momentum. Well, the first thing that we did, we had a really good time. So we celebrated. We actually created some T-shirts for the client. We took it over to them with some champagne, and we said, look, you're never really too old to rock. This is a 100-year-old organization. They should celebrate the success that they had. We didn't quite know that those T-shirts would come in handy, however. And so what we did with those T-shirts is we put them on. We went downtown, I think the 3rd week into the campaign, with Janelle and an intern that she had, just armed with our iPhones and whatever kind of smartphones we brought with us, no fancy video equipment. And we used a social media platform called Tout. And Tout is kind of like Instagram for video, where you're only allowed to take 15 seconds worth of video, which was fine for us. And what we did is we asked people to hold up the Here for Good sign and to tell us their immigration story. And within a matter of 2.5 hours, we had stories from a sampling of, I think, 20 to 25 different countries. And the backdrop was beautiful. We had the Lincoln Memorial, we had the Capitol building, we had a little boy was holding an American flag. So we went down there with them and did that, and it just goes to show you that there are other ways to collect content. You don't have to feel like you have to create it originally. Just go, with your mobile phone, with your camera, and capture that. This one was great. This was, I think, the most viral. This was the most viral, and then the second one was probably Gandhi. But with this one, it was cute. So this is Erie. This is one of the field offices that USCRI has. So USCRI is in D.C. They have an office in Erie. And on the first day of the campaign, they printed out this Here for Good tagline, and they had their little preschoolers take pictures with it. And it was great. So again, it's showing the work that they're doing. It's actually showing the migrants and showing the kids and showing that they're here for good too. They did that again, I think, in one of their ESL classes here, printed that out and took a picture. This is all just curation. This actually looks like stock photography, but it's not. So this is actually taking pictures of the work that you do. I know that for those of you on the phone, time and time again, you feel like you're in your office, you can't really get out and take these pictures, but think about how you can actually get out and take these pictures. So here they went and took a picture of this Cuban family that was being resettled. I think maybe in Erie. It's just beautiful. And then they superimposed the tagline on top so it could work as a template for them. This human photos go over very well in social, and that's a story to be told here is on Facebook in particular and others. It's all digital communications is now very visual. It's all very photo based, and it's got to be powerful. And so these are all pictures of their staff up in here in Washington D.C. And so they were taking pictures, I think, when we did the 95 languages post, and so they wanted to take pictures with the word hello in a particular language, or I think some other ones were just taking pictures in front of all of the materials that they have busy at work. So it was a great way to show a behind-the-scenes look of USCRI. Okay, now we're at the last point, which is how do you measure the results? And this might actually have been one of the things that attracted you all to this webinar today is, so we know how to be busy on social media and to have all this activity happening, but how do you know it's actually impacting the organization? How do we know that we can measure this, and what measures should we use? So we're going to revisit here USCRI's original goals. Again, you might have shared goals here: raise the organizational profile, tell stories. How do we measure back to this? How is it quantifiable? A key takeaway is that multi-channel benefits are critical. We know, and this is just kind of a visualization to show you that on Facebook, this is primarily where we hosted the content. However, we put together a few press releases that were sent out on the first day of the campaign. And then at the end of every week, we sent together an email wrap-up, revisiting the high points of the campaign, revisiting the content of the campaign. And in this diagram below, which is pulled straight from Facebook Insights, you'll see the immediate jump in new fans. The launch of the campaign was the highest jump, obviously, and then the other jumps are the emails that we sent out at the end of the week. Remember, the main goal wasn't to increase fans, but that's critical if you want to just keep driving your own community to another platform. And what I mean by that is if you already have an email list of, say, 18,000, but you only have a Facebook presence of 2,200, something's wrong there. You should be able to funnel some of that 18,000 into Facebook, and so that's what you're trying to do here. They also used a lot of this content on Twitter and Pinterest. All right, so the fun stuff, the results. We have some really good images from a conclusion after all 5 weeks, but what this shows you is, I think, this is pretty much summarizing a couple different ways that we measured the campaign. So what you see here is the organic and viral growth. Where you see that red arrow pointing, that was the launch of the campaign. And then it goes back a month to show you how it wasn't quite as strong as it was once we launched the campaign. And so for them, they really achieved triple and sometimes quadruple digit growth in reach, where you see impressions grew by 383%, reached users increased by 413%. And then for engagement, you saw that that increased, again, triple and quadruple digits with the interactions, how many people were liking the content, commenting on the content, sharing the content. And that's very critical to the ultimate goal, which is to get as many people within their Facebook community to be exposed to the content, because Facebook has its own EdgeRank algorithm, which determines who of your own community will see your content. It's not guaranteed that if you have 2,000 fans, all 2,000 will see your content. So we intentionally tried to optimize the content for engagement so that we could get more visibility, and that's what this EdgeRank score measures, that we grew that by 84% just through the content optimization. And then I think that they had a quote, they pulled some data at the end. We don't have that here on the slide, but their online donations grew by 33%, and their email count grew by 50% year over year. And then the one anecdote that we've got down there is, I think it was like week 2 into the campaign, they called us and said, oh, we just got a great story from Erie, or Albany, excuse me. And they came in and they said a guy was following you guys on Facebook, and they said, wow, it just reminded him to donate. And he went into the Albany office and made a $5,000 cash donation. So again, it's connecting online with offline. When you have that strong brand and you're encouraging people to act, you're connecting them with them on that DNA level, and you're getting them to feel really good about your brand.
And I think it's important, too, to emphasize here the sort of the focus on engagement rather than fan growth. Again, we said that a couple times through the course of the webinar. And what we're interested in here is breaking through the noise and breaking through the news feed so that people see the content. And really, the reason that's such an important starting place is because fan growth is a great goal, in the long term. Certainly, you want to grow your community and increase, the size and your reach and everything like that. But really, what you want to ask is, what are they going to find when they come here? If you're just putting up, ads on Facebook directing people to your page, you want them when they get there to find good content. And when you see engagement numbers like this, what it's telling you is the people that are coming here are liking what they see. And so that's at the point where you want to say, okay, now it's time to invite more people to the party once you know everyone's having a good time.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And also, I think when we send you all the recording, we're going to send you the slide deck as well. And I'll update this final slide because we have a beautiful measurement slide that, at a glance from afar, you can see clearly the 5 themes, the 5 weeks. So for the first week, you can even see it here where it jumps at the launch of the campaign. Then you see a strong dip. That's simply the weekend. There was no activity on Saturday and Sunday. And so it was really interesting where we could see these 5 distinct mountains. And each mountain was each week with each theme. And so that's why we knew early on when we were mentioning all the different themes, we knew that the myth fact outperformed all the others because it was the strongest in organic and viral growth. All right. So I think we walked through the entire process and gave you guys some great tools and tips and techniques. You're probably going to ask for some questions now.
Yeah, sure. We have about 12 minutes left in the presentation, so happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Feel free to type anything into the chat, or you can also raise your hand in the webinar. We can unmute you. One question, how long did the planning process take? How long did we spend on discovery versus campaign execution? Was it about 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Maybe?
Yeah, it was about a month max on discovery, and that was shaping the story. That process took about a month. And then designing the content took about 2 months in a way.
Yeah, designing the content was a little bit of a longer process because we got pretty quick agreement sort of on the overall messaging of the campaign, but then once we started drilling down into the details, I think that's really where the rubber hits the road, and there's sort of a lot of back and forth on how do we actually want to present this message, and a lot of sketching and wireframing and brainstorming. But once we got to the end of that process, I think everyone was very happy with sort of the result of that.
Mm-hmm.
The total campaign, there's another question about how many people were involved. The total staff on this from the Forum 1 side was myself, Laura, and then Tracy Breeze, who's another person that works here on our marketing team. And then from USCRI's perspective, it was really just Janelle.
Mm-hmm.
She had some support, I believe, from her intern and a few other staff. But it was a pretty small team. We also had a designer and a developer that spent a little bit of time working on a project on our end as well. But those were the core teams that were in the room during the brainstorming sessions. And I think also the size of the team was one thing that was helpful in sort of keeping the process moving quickly and allowing us to arrive at decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They say a committee is an organization with more than 6 legs and no brain. So if you can sort of keep your team size small in these, particularly when you're working on something creative like this, I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, and it was important for us too, and Michael said that we had the designer too, but in the beginning it was Michael and I from Forum 1, and so we would form what you would consider the strategist. We're like the creative, where we're trying to shape that big story along with the client, and then getting to the point of the concept map and doing all that, again, just as ourselves, but then when we get to the point of wireframing it out, it's, okay, I know my limitations, I know I'm not a designer, let's let somebody else do this. He was involved, however, in understanding the big picture because he needed to. He needed to understand, the beauty of the brand in order to really bring it to life.
And that's one thing I think too that made this this project really successful was the amount of time that we spent on discovery and about learning about the organization. Because what that research up front pays dividends down the road because you can find other sort of touch points. You can find points of commonality, points of synergy, to use a buzzword. You can find ways to to link things back together and ways and points at which it makes sense to dive deeper, and to say, no, that's a really interesting idea there. Let's explore that. That gets at the core of what we're trying to say here. That was something that came out, particularly in the myths and facts section. We found so much good content and such a good reaction from the audiences that let USCRI kind of go back and say, okay, this is an area where we need to spend more time and more resources.
Yeah, and I couldn't, agree with you more, especially about the value of discovery, the value of really understanding your brand and shaping that brand. And so going into this campaign, did we ever know that we'd go downtown with our mobile phones and shoot video? Absolutely not, but it worked for the brand. We were like, guys, let's go do this, and so it was so exciting. And I know I really wish Janelle was here today because she felt she had a deadline that she had to work on. She couldn't make it, but she would tell you, and she now feels empowered. She feels that she knows where to go. She has direction. She has purpose.
And I'll say broadly, too, outside of the context of this campaign, I mean, that's really, in my mind, a model for success in sort of the digital social age that we find ourselves in now is, don't try to overplan and don't try to know everything in advance, but go in with with an attitude of let's see what's going on here and let's see where the opportunities are and be open and flexible to change. Mm-hmm. That's something that's an attitude that's going to pay huge dividends throughout any sort of project that you work on like this. It's just going in with that open mind.
Right. And I think that was one of the challenges for USCRI is they didn't know what platform to start on. So when they first came to us, they said, we need help with social media. And we said, well, to start, we're not going to check all the boxes. We're not going to do Facebook, Twitter, and everything. Let's start with one to prove the concept and get that story right and get that content right and prove the success through the metrics to show. I think we reached over 250,000 people with this campaign in 5 weeks. And someone asked a question early on to say, did we use any paid media? No, not at all. And that's what Facebook is kind of trying to get you to do. You must pay to reach your own fans. No, you must not. You must actually shape a powerful brand and reach them organically.
Yep. Great. How did you deal with getting permission to use people's images, videos, stories to benefit the organization? You guys brought just release forms down to the mall, right?
Yep. And actually, it was interesting because when we first got there, we were a little apprehensive, like, oh, how are we going to approach people? So let's just ask them and see what happens. As soon as we asked the first group, we got like 5 people lined up. They were all adults, and then other people were overhearing. by the way, for any of you on the phone that work in any space related to getting these kinds of stories, you must go to the Lincoln Memorial because it's just chock full of people from all over the world with different cultures and everything like that. And we even had people approach us who they basically were overhearing what we were saying to someone else. And a little girl came over with her mom and said, I want to tell the story of my grandma. And somebody else wanted to tell the story of their mother, grandfather, whoever. And they had these powerful stories. So people want to talk. It's the 15 minutes of fame kind of thing.
And each of those people become a new potential fan. You know, they're saying, hey, I'm up on this site. Let's check it out.
Yep.
They share it with their networks, and that's how you grow.
Well, we even had someone who was running for office somewhere up in upstate New York. And so she was so excited. She said, I'm actually running, or her husband was running for office. But she said, yeah, he's running for office, and he believes so much in immigration issues. And so, again, you made that connection. So instead of overtly just, again, broadcasting your press releases for what you stand for, it's more the softer side. It's the brand side. And so connect with people, and you'll still resonate with them.
Great. Any other questions for anybody? Okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for participating in the webinar today and joining. Our next webinar is going to be on data visualization in early June. Yeah, thanks again for attending. If you have any additional questions about today's content or interested in learning more about how Forum 1 can help with your project, please feel free to contact Laura. Her information is right there on the slide. As soon as the webinar ends, you'll be presented with a very brief survey. Please feel free to fill it out and suggest future webinar topics. Yep. And thanks so much.
And I just want to mention one other thing before everybody drops off. We're actually going to try to pitch the same session at a conference, and we would love, everyone's crowdsourcing it, and people are voting. So along with the email we'll send, there's going to be just a simple link. If you just click in there, if you loved what you heard today and you want us to spread the word to other nonprofits, please vote for us.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody.